alive! It's alive! It's alive! Now I know what it feels like to be gone.
Perhaps you had better start from the beginning.
It is noted that both Universal and Hammer Studios' adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein are cornerstones of horror cinema. Both films represent their respected eras and transcended what could have been seen on screen. More importantly, how they portrayed the film's lead, Dr. Frankenstein. In today's video, we will explore how Terence Fisher's The Curse of Frankenstein took the Mad Doctor archetype and transformed him into a complex character, who then transforms into the film's monster. Before we examine our Baron, first we must see the groundwork laid upon by Colin Clive's Henry Frankenstein.
Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
Colin Clive's performance is a little eccentric, but you have to be to raise the dead, am I right?
Go and see for yourself.
For the majority of Frankenstein, Clive is a very curious and unhealthily driven man. But upon bringing to life his creation, played respectively by Boris Karloff, he's openly cautious and even frightened by it. There is something that bothers me though. Henry Frankenstein isn't punished for his crimes. He knows what he's done and the cost of the lives of several villagers. He created a monster. And due to his status in society, he was protected from the world, whereas his creation wasn't.
Bring him down to the village and let's take him home.
If you're asking me why am I bringing this up, I'll explain later in the video. I do have to point out that in Universal's Frankenstein, Henry wasn't the main focus of the film. Colin Clive was only in 2 films. The other sequels were either offspring, distant relatives, or unrelated characters to the Frankenstein character. The monster was the focus, and the selling point of the picture. With that being said, Hammer's Frankenstein lacked ethics and empathy for others. He kills if need be. Failure isn't an option. Victor's curiosity consumes him, much like Henry Frankenstein, but when Henry robbed graves and cadavers for his experiments, Victor was willing to kill for them. There are 3 key moments in The Curse of Frankenstein that I find that define the character's complex nature, an evolution from the usual Mad Doctor archetype. The first being Victor's first victim in his pursuit for a perfect creation. After assembling the parts needed from the gallows and the charnel house, Victor began looking for a brain. His subject would be Professor Bernstein.
Look out, Professor, look out!
How much longer is this to go on? Meeting like this in dark corridors.
There is a subplot that is nicely woven into the story of Victor's affair with the castle maid Justine. Victor was promised his cousin Elizabeth to be married when he was 15 years old. And here is our Baron in the midst of an affair. The film doesn't show Victor to be the loyal type whatsoever.
It'll be your duty to serve my cousin Elizabeth and see to her every need just as thoroughly as you have mine.
When the creature had been revived a second time, Justine threatens to go to the police if Victor does not marry her. She also claims to be pregnant with the Baron's child. The Baron's answer to all of this? Locked in a room, Justine is brutally murdered off-screen. Earlier in this film, Victor seems slightly smitten with Justine, but as we get to the end of the film, we see his true colors for her. She's disposable, like everyone else. After the murder of a blind man and a child by the creature, Paul and Victor hunt down the monster. Paul kills the creature, and both men bury it, making a promise to end this experiment. It's a promise that Victor immediately breaks. Victor revives his creation for a second time, and it looks far more monstrous. A side note here, Christopher Lee's second rebirth is far more haunting than his first. The black eyes from the blood is a nice accent piece for the monster. The reason I include this scene in particular is due to how Victor values his friendship with Paul, that he violates it and allows the creature to live once more.
You perfect physical being, this animal.
It's the ultimate betrayal after the majority of the film is summed up with Paul telling his friend to stop, that nothing good will come to playing God. The end result is Paul seeing the monstrous side of his best friend reflected in his creation. So why do I refer to Hammer's Frankenstein as the Baron? Well, that was his title in the novel. It was part of his status in society, but Hammer's adaptation of Victor Frankenstein is sinister and darker. To wrap up this comparison of Universal and Hammer's Frankenstein, the title of Baron doesn't free him from the authorities. Henry Frankenstein's antics were mild compared to the lies, deceit, and murder committed by Victor. With that, we have a story where the Mad Doctor is forced to face the repercussions of his actions. Of course, this isn't the end for the Baron. The Curse of Frankenstein was a big hit and brought in $8 million from the cinemas. It would go on to be a flagship franchise for Hammer Studios and the birth for Hammer Horror. Multiple sequels and a reboot were made underneath the Frankenstein franchise, as well as several other iconic Gothic horror films like Dracula and the Mummy stemmed from this film's success. What did you guys all think about the character of the Baron and the Curse of Frankenstein itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you guys all next time. In the wake of the horror revival in the late 1950s, Hammer Studios and their working relationship with Universal Studios kept the ball rolling with more adaptations of Universal monsters, making them more bloodier, violent, sexier, and more complex. Their next project? The Curse of the Werewolf is based on Guy Endor's novel, The Werewolf of Paris, with the titular werewolf moved from Paris to Spain, with a then unknown Oliver Reed in the lead role. Terence Fisher would be directing at the helm, with Hammer producer Anthony Hines filling in as screenwriter under the pseudonym John Elder. Now I know what you guys are thinking. Terence Fisher, Oliver Reed, werewolf? How are you not excited for this? Well, let's talk about it. In today's video, we will look at why this werewolf movie failed to live up to the rest of Hammer Horror's greats. Why did it flop at the box office? And is it worth remembering? The Curse of the Werewolf is a gothic tale about good versus evil and the fate of one man's soul whose life is crafted from tragedy. In the center of Leon Corleto, played by the up-and-coming Oliver Reed, whose fate is determined for him at birth. The story is simple enough for most werewolf films, so why did it fail? One of the most glaring issues with this film is its first act. It is loaded with exposition and backstory. We are introduced to the beggar and the Marquis Sinestro as the origin of violence. Through the first act, we get more characters such as the mute servant girl, who in turn is also a victim to both men, and the mother of Leon. Then comes Don Alfredo Corleto and his housekeeper Teresa as the surrogate parents to Leon. We are introduced to two things in this first act: those responsible for his curse, and the family who will learn to love the child despite his affliction. The lore of the werewolf is rooted in folklore and superstition, something that most modern horror movies have thrown by the wayside. We've abandoned a crucial part of the setup just to get the monster on screen. But who cares about the history when we all want is just blood and guts? I mean, I don't mind that from time to time, but I love to see the myths of those worlds play out too. This is unconventional from Hammer. If they were attempting to have this be the startup of another franchise, this isn't the story to launch with. A whole 40 minutes out of a 90-minute runtime is devoted to backstory. And I would be lying if I didn't say I was looking at my clock to see how far I was into this film, and still no sign of the lead. We're not following a singular person's story though. like a traditional narrative. Instead, what we are getting is an assortment of characters who are just playing their part of exposition for over a third of the film. So why should we care about these characters? As I have mentioned already, Oliver Reed does not show up in this film until later, and immediately he's charming. Why not? He's Oliver Reed, the man who would go on to star in other films and would make himself an icon. He's given his first lead role, and he doesn't waste time getting us on his side. But with that said, the character of Leon isn't a complex or interesting character, like in other werewolf movies with the likes of Lawrence Talbot and The Wolfman, or David Kessler in An American Werewolf in London.
What was it?
He's just a friendly guy who we know as the audience is about to have his life turned completely upside down, but we don't get to know him as a person beyond the tragedy. So when watching this film, I feel somewhat sorry for him, but what I'm getting at is that Leon Corleto is not a character. He's more of a subject in this really weird experiment. And a matter of will he, won't he, given to his monstrous tendencies, that is what Leon Corleto is. He is a subject in an experiment and not a character in a story. Wrapping up some of the criticisms is the werewolf. Where is he? The film is called The Curse of the Werewolf, and we haven't really seen any werewolf action yet. The beggar in the cell looks sort of werewolf-like. He has elements of lycanthrope, qualities. And we can do the math that shows that how he was treated by the Marquise. And over the years of that abuse, he has devolved mentally and physically into a feral animal.
I have bad dreams every night now, Uncle.
I see.
Then there is the first signs of Leon's transformation as a child. That's all within the first act, ladies and gentlemen. And they're two separate scenes. We don't get a full werewolf transformation until the last 10 minutes of the movie. A 90-minute runtime with only 10 minutes of werewolf action. Come on, Hammer, give us some more. Now that I've gotten through some of the harsh criticisms of this film, let me tell you what I love and respect about it. Firstly, the werewolf costume and color. It does not restrict Oliver Reed's performance in the costume, and the man can play one hell of a werewolf. I wish we got more of this, and then those little tragic moments in between where he's realized the horror and damage he has done.
There's blood on my hands.
Side tangent here. In case if you haven't noticed, I adore Oliver Reed. If you haven't seen Burnt Offerings or The Devil, I encourage you to go watch these films. Some of the most amazing horror films starring Reed that touch on themes of family and religion. Now back to our video. The film's greatest risk was its first act, and while I mentioned previously the errors of that, upon a second viewing, I loved it. From my understanding, Terrence Fisher and Anthony Hines were trying to tell a tragic story that is layered in themes of generational violence and hate, and that creating a child in that environment will only breed a monster. If you take a child out of that setting and put them in a loving home, there is hope for the child. But then again, this is a tragedy and not a feel-good, happily ever after story. Most Gothic fiction usually has to demand some type of a sacrifice, something that the main character must give up in order to be freed from the horrors. My favorite character in this film is not Leon, but in fact his adopted father, Don Alfredo. Alfredo is the bridge between all the time jumps and is present throughout the majority of the film, playing the reluctant rescuer who becomes a father. If anything, this film is also his story and journey into fatherhood, and will do whatever is needed to protect his son. He reluctantly becomes the town's hero and has to spare his son's lifetime of suffering. Those last moments of the film are important with Alfredo killing the monster and seeing his son weep. It kills Alfredo to do it, but at the end of the day, he knows Leon's at peace finally. Now, I don't know about you. That's a hero's journey. The character of Alfredo Corleto shares similar trademarks to other fathers in horror films. Claude Rains' Sir John Talbot is a father forced to spare his son the agony of his affliction in The Wolfman. I can't help but pick up elements of Gregory Peck's fatherly role in The Omen from this as well. I'm not saying that there's like a direct correlation to this, but just viewing the film through a modern day perspective, I see all the loving dads in horror cinema that at the end of the day have to do the impossible task for their children. Moving away from just looking at the movie from a subjective opinion, one of the things I've noticed in Curse of the Werewolf is that it's pretty tame in its depiction of violence and horror. There are more cutaways from the violence rather than showing it compared to the other Hammer horror films like Dracula and the Mummy. In Dennis Meekel's A History of Horror, The Rise and Fall of the House of Hammer, we get details on the battle between Hammer Studios and the British Board of Film Classification. When it comes to gore, sex, and violence in Hammer films, the BBFC were the biggest hurdle yet. After the release of Peeping Tom in 1960 and its controversial showing of sex and violence, again, nothing new coming from Hammer at this time, John Trevelyan of the BBFC refused to be bought or go easy on the studio and film, going so far as believe that Hammer Studios should not be making horror films. Before filming, Trevelyan returned the script to Anthony Hines with a letter singling out the strongest condemnations in the screenplay: the degradation of the beggar and the rape of the servant girl. I strongly urge you to read Meekel's book to learn all the fights and struggles Hammer had with the censorship board. With the limited release in June of 1961 here in America, it would sadly fall victim to two summer releases, The Parent Trap and The Guns of Navarone, to conquer the box office. Also, releasing a Gothic horror film at the beginning of summer seems like set up the failure. The Curse of the Werewolf has its faults, but overall, as a horror film, I find it to be a unique Gothic tale. While the film's title and marketing sells it to us as a monster movie, it's more than that. At the center of this tragedy is something more complex that I can't seem to crack. What did you think of Hammer's attempt to make their own Wolfman? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time as we cover another Hammer adaptation of a Universal classic. When we think of franchises from Hammer Studios, we think of Frankenstein and Dracula. The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula were cornerstones for the revival of Gothic and British horror cinema in the late 50s. Their placement in Hammer Studios are what helped birth the Hammer horror brand. But there is another. What if I told you there was another great franchise of Hammer horror films? One with a better track record of hits rather than misses. One that feels like a forgotten middle child in this family of horror that produced some exceptional entertainment and scares. Not born out of classic literature like his brothers, but instead born out of pure cinematic influences. We're talking about The Mummy. In today's video, we'll look at the Mummy franchise from Hammer. 4 films not connected to one another, 4 individual tales of terror, and ask ourselves, is this Hammer's strongest franchise? On August 20th, 1958, Hammer and Universal International announced a joint finance and distribution agreement that would give Hammer remake rights to Universal's storied horror film library. The titles in these deals would be The Phantom of the Opera, The Invisible Man, and The Mummy. The Phantom of the Opera wouldn't be adapted by Hammer for another 3 years or so, and The Invisible Man sadly never got a production.
Go now. Go and destroy those who desecrated the tomb of our princess.
The Mummy would quickly go into production. While it is a remake of the 1932 classic with Boris Karloff, this film would not include the iconic Imhotep. but instead used the character of Karis from the sequels. The story of Hammer's mummy would also borrow story elements and characters from the following films: The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, and The Mummy's Curse. That's a whole lot of mummies. The Mummy would follow a straightforward plot, with British archaeologists in 1895 unearthing the tomb of Princess Ananka. Stephen Banning's findings would leave him in a catatonic state in a nursing home for 3 years. Upon coming out of his terrified state, he calls upon his son John, played by Peter Cushing. What happens next is the awakening of Karis, played by Christopher Lee respectively, and the deaths of those who disturbed the tomb of the princess. John Banning would survive the wrath of Karis after his wife confronts the mummy. Oh yeah, there's this fourth subplot where John's wife Isabel resembles Karis's lover, Princess Ananka, but only with her hair down, obviously. For an out-of-nowhere love story, it saves John's skin more than once. The Mummy takes Isabel to the swamps where he's been hiding out in between the kills. This set piece is stripped solely from The Mummy's Curse. Once John's wife is safe, the mummy is shot down by the police and perishes in the swamp. The plot is nothing super engaging. You're just waiting for Karis to pop in, murder someone, and then exit. And those are the exciting parts of the film. It's slow to build, learn the lore of the world, the characters who reside, and the standout performance here is from Christopher Lee, who plays Karis. To have the majority of his body covered and work stiff, he has only his eyes to convey emotion. He's only shown once in the film outside of the wraps, though, in a flashback that details his love for Princess Ananka and his attempt to revive her from the dead with the Scroll of Thoth, before being captured, of course, and mummified to be her guardian for all eternity. Overall, The Mummy is a decent entry into this franchise. You get what you're expecting coming from this film, and Hammer doesn't try to reinvent the wheel whatsoever. 5 years later, we would get a follow-up from Terence Fisher and Jimmy Sangster's The Mummy, with Michael Carreras' The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Carreras would be the film's director, screenwriter, and sole producer, with Alvin Rakoff co-writing the screenplay. So how did this hold up to Hammer's first outing with The Mummy? I actually think this is the better film. It's 1900 in Egypt, and the expedition for the tomb of Ra-Antef is a success. Mostly. French professor Eugene Dubois is captured and killed by the protectors of the tomb. Don't get attached to these guys. They don't stick around long enough for us to really even care about them. The expedition crew consists of John Bray, an Egyptologist, and Annette's fiancé, played by Ronald Howard, Fred Clark as Alexander King, an American promoter, George Pastel as Hashmi Bey, a representative of the Egypt colonial government. If this man looks familiar to you, he was the villain Mehmet Bey controlling Karis in the last film. Finally, there is Sir Giles Dalrymple, another Egyptologist, played by Jack Gwilym, respectively. Annette Dubois is heartbroken of her father's death, but she gets over pretty quickly when the expedition runs into the mysterious Adam Beauchamp, played by Terrence Morgan. Arriving in London, things take a turn for the worse, with Alexander King's exhibition show of his newly found mummy has turned up missing. The mummified Ra-Antef goes on a murderous rampage in one night for those who have defiled his grave. Some of the kills here feel safe due to Hammer's battle with the British Board of Film Classification. King is knocked unconscious and tumbles into a river, and Sir Giles is bludgeoned to death with an artifact. Originally, Sir Giles' death was to be from a broken back. In the scene, the mummy enters with intensity and eats a few bullets from Sir Giles before the man's back is to be snapped in two. But the BBFC wouldn't allow it. I do feel that the censors were being overzealous in these cuts. King's death was changed, as originally he was strangled to death. Both deaths could have been used and seen off-screen through the works of lighting. But who am I to question the great British Board of Film Classification? If you want to see how petty they are with this film, John Trevelyan criticized the short scene in the script of a beetle seen crawling over a roasted pig. His reasoning for it to be cut? Sounds a bit disgusting. Well, excuse the screenwriters for trying to make us feel squeamish here in the theaters. A kill later in the film that I thought was the gnarliest was the death of Hashmi Bey. Upon seeing that the mummy is real and how he feels he's brought dishonor and shame to his ancestors, Hashmi begs for a painful death by Ra Antef. His wish was granted. Even I was shocked at this scene and thought, the balls on Hammer for this kill. Moving forward, we get to the meat of this mystery with the Adam Beauchamp guy. He has succeeded in seducing Annette and keeping her away from John. Although the mummy does come by for a visit and knocks Adam out before attempting to claim Annette's life. Ra Antef refuses to finish the job and leaves before the authorities can arrive. If you're wondering if this spicy fling is going anywhere between Annette, Adam, and John, well, I'm afraid to let you down, folks. Later, Adam confesses to Annette that he is the brother of Ra Antef and an immortal who has grown weary of living. The brother's father, Ramsay VIII, has placed a curse on Adam for the death of his older brother, before the king perished himself. The film's real villain now has a chance at rest in the afterlife. Adam commands his brother to kill Annette, but they are interrupted by John and the police. Fleeing, Adam loses his hand while trying to escape and commands his brother to kill Annette in the sewers. The mummy resists, and we see the two brothers square off. Ra Antef drowns his brother before causing the roof above them to collapse. Annette is saved, and we end our story with the curse finally broken. This film has a lot going on within the 88-minute runtime. There's a few laughs, some decent action, and great scares. This felt like a horror adventure that I would come to expect from a mummy movie and more. Despite the fight with the censors, I would gladly tell folks who want to watch Hammer's Mummy franchise to start with this film. It's fun and it has a bit of everything for everyone. The Mummy would return to the screens 3 years later with The Mummy Shroud in 1967. This would be the final film made at the famous Bray studio before Hammer moved their productions to L Street Studios. John Gillings would take the reins as director and co-write the film's screenplay with Anthony Hines and Michael Carreras standing in as producer. How well did this third entry into the Hammer franchise do? Let's talk about it. Spoiler alert for those, but this will be the last time we see this bandage monster that we've come to love in these films. More on that later. Our story opens with a flashback to the origins of our mummy, Prem, a manservant fleeing with the young pharaoh Khatu Bey, after a coup on the palace killed the boy's father. Khatu Bey perished in the desert and is buried. To clear things up, our mummy here isn't the boy, but it's the manservant. Cut to the archaeologists in 1920 who have uncovered the tomb of Khatu Bey. Nothing more in this plot changes compared to the other two mummy movies, and why not? If it's not broken, don't fix it. The archaeologists uncover a tomb, take back a few artifacts and the bodies of two mummies, and in disturbing their rest, they are cursed to be killed. So what makes this film different from the rest of the other mummy movies? Well, it's in the title of the movie. The mummy Prem can only be controlled when someone holds the shroud. That's about it. The film's villain is the same as in any of the other installments. Nothing new. The film wasn't given great reviews by both critics and the film's director. The Mummy Shroud, though, had some great moments. The kills in the film feel very on par with Hammer in its decade, especially the damage done to the mummy. He takes a lot of damage and manages to keep the power balance in his hands. Prem's demise is a fantastic way to destroy such an iconic monster. With the film's real villain dead, and the female lead commanding Prem to destroy himself, we're given a close-up shot of the mummy crushing his own head. Movie magic really helps sell this demise well, with the mummy's head bursting with chalky substance, and the bone shattering leaves a very strong impression. Overall, it's not my favorite of the franchise, but again, this film also shows that really there can't be a terrible mummy film. You're going to walk away enjoying something out of this film. So remember back at the beginning of this video when I said that none of these films were based off of any form of literature and that The Mummy was created purely from cinematic influence? I kind of lied to you. 4 years after the release of The Mummy Shroud, Hammer releases Blood from the Mummy's Tomb and solidifies The Mummy as a franchise alongside Frankenstein and Dracula. The final entry would be an adaptation of Bram Stoker's The Jewel of the Seven Stars. I mentioned earlier that The Mummy Shroud would be the last time we see our iconic monster in wraps. So how can we have a mummy movie with no mummy, and yet call it Blood from the Mummy's Tomb? Well, let's look into that. To preface, I have not read Stoker's tale that this film is based on, so this won't be a critique of does this adaptation do well to the source material. We've seen so far now how Hammer handles adaptation, so take with that as you will. Blood from the Mummy's Tomb starts out like every mummy movie we've covered so far. An expedition discovers strange artifacts in the tomb of Queen Tara, but their biggest discovery is unexpected. The body of Queen Tara is perfectly preserved, with the exception to her right hand being severed. With a ruby ring, the expedition returns their findings to London, with Professor Fuchs taking the ruby ring and the preserved body of Queen Tara to store in his cellar. The professor gives his daughter Margaret the ruby ring for a birthday present thereafter. Big pause here. So Daddy goes on an expedition and discovers the body of an Egyptian queen that looks exactly like his daughter. And so he decides to put a ruby ring from the dead queen's hand and gives it to his daughter for her birthday. Yeah, I definitely don't see nothing really bad that's going to come from all of this. Once Margaret has the ring, she feels a psychic link between her and the dead queen. Soon after, the rest of the expedition who took off with Tara's loot are killed off one by one. A mummy's curse, you say? We also get an introduction to a strange man by the name of Corbic, who Professor Fuchs is very leery of from the start. But Margaret can't shake off those charming features of Corbic. As the film comes to a close, it is revealed that Corbic is a disciple of Queen Tara and is attempting to transfer the spirit of his undead queen into the body of Margaret. Professor Fuchs intervenes to save his daughter, and in the end, Margaret kills the queen for good, before having the house collapse on everyone. It's revealed that Margaret is the sole survivor from all of this, but as the film comes to a close, we get a tiny inkling that maybe Queen Tara did win after all. Overall, I find this film to be a very satisfying end to the Mummy franchise.
More chances for her to be reborn.
The production suffered many obstacles in the making of this film. Production was moved 2 months ahead of its scheduled time. Peter Cushing was originally cast as the role of the professor, but due to the death of his wife, he pulled out and was replaced with Andrew Keir. The film's original director, Seth Holt, passed away from a heart attack at age 47, only 5 weeks into production. It was up to Michael Carreras to pick up the pieces and finish production. Was this film suffering from a curse of its own? Maybe, but I'll let you guys figure that out. Final thoughts on this picture, so we do not overstay my welcome. Blood from the Mummy's Tomb borrows elements from previous Hammer mummy films without feeling unoriginal. Corbic reminds me a lot of Adam Beauchamp from The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. The beginning of the film follows the same formula as the others, but thankfully switches gears from feeling like a monster movie to more of a supernatural chiller. The scene in which one of the expeditioners is in an insane asylum is one of my favorite set pieces. It's eerie and tense in its build-up, like Sam Raimi just grabbed a hold of the camera and started filming Evil Dead. Hammer really pulled out everything in this film to give us a great movie during a very dark period in the company's history. That's it for the Mummy franchise. 4 films, 3 of them I strongly encourage you to watch. When starting this project, I was walking in blind with only the knowledge known of the first film. But upon my discoveries and multiple viewings, I found these films to be fun and adventurous with a good amount of scares. It was after finishing this franchise that I realized that one of my childhood favorites must have taken inspiration from these films. Growing up on the Stephen Sommers Mummy movies as a kid, I saw the moments there. The fights on the boat, the mummy falling for the film's female lead, resurrections, and curses. While yes, Stephen Sommers' films were based on the Universal horror classics, I feel like this took a lot from Hammer's portrayal of the monster and the curse. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it's funny seeing Hammer inspired by Universal and vice versa. A wheel of inspiration that doesn't feel dull or over repetitive. So look, film is a subjective medium. There are films that I've mentioned here that you probably liked or disliked, but to me personally, I feel like this was the best Hammer had to offer with its franchise. Looking at the Frankenstein and Dracula franchise films, you can see the quality of the films go down as more sequels are made. They didn't end with a good final film. Sure, they filled this need for shock, gore, and in a later years, sex, but I find there is a greater quality over quantity with The Mummy over the other two franchises. What did you think of the Mummy franchise from Hammer? Do you have a favorite film from this lineup? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time as we look at the legacy of Hammer's Dracula. So I know in our last video, we were supposed to cover Dracula. Well, shit happened. I just couldn't focus on writing the video, getting anywhere past the writing stages. And I've learned from the past that I can't steamroll anything into production unless my full heart is into this. Maybe another time I will write and produce this video, but until then, I have a very busy schedule. But the purpose of this video is to properly wrap up my Hammer horror series. I didn't fall out of love with covering Hammer films, but I did feel the need to step away to cover other videos and topics I also have interest in. So I do want to look back at the 3 videos I have made for this series as a whole. I didn't exactly know what to do with this series, hence the subtitle, A Retrospective Series. I wanted to do film reviews, but I also wanted to look at specific characters from these movies and examine what made them tick. I wanted to look deeper in the films I've only heard of, but never seen. This series did that for me, and more. Looking at the pilot, The Baron, I was comparing how Universal and Hammer adapted Dr. Frankenstein for the screen from different eras. While Hammer is closer to the source material, they also took liberties to make Baron Frankenstein a real monster. I dived into the sequels as well, as I originally intended to cover the franchise as a whole. But that was too big of a challenge for me to start off fresh on this channel. Regardless, I learned a lot from that video, and I'm still proud of it. The Curse of the Werewolf was a fresh Hammer film for me to enjoy. I never had rewatched a film so many times in the past year than this film in particular. I was learning a lot of what Terrence Fisher and Anthony Hines brought to the Gothic brand for Hammer, and it's become one of my favorite films to date. I would like to revisit this film for a future video. The Mummy franchise was a project that really took a lot out of me, but I was determined to get better in my writing and editing for such a large project. 4 films, 4 separate stories that add to the mythos without making a mess of things. I adore this franchise and its quirks. Making that video was again a challenge, but one I needed when it comes to covering franchises. If you haven't seen Hammer's Mummy films, I encourage you to go watch them before checking out my video on said franchise. It's worthwhile fun. None of these were perfect, and I've learned not to strive for that. Instead, there's a Willem Dafoe quote that I keep in the back of my mind when it comes to making my videos.
I always like this idea of trying to fail.
What do you mean?
Try to make a bad painting. Try to act badly. Try to be lousy in that scene. It's interesting. It kind of puts the idea of striving for perfection, you know, does something.
If anything, these videos helped me immensely, and also working on another project of video series with the top 5 Gothic horror films that I'm slowly kind of getting rid of the top 5 part and retooling it for a whole brand new series while in the making. What can I say? I like to evolve my videos. I don't look at any of this as a failure, but instead as lessons learned on what works both visually and strictly in the screenplay when trying to get my passions out there to you guys. I love these films. I love making these videos. This isn't me throwing in the towel by any chance. We have a lot to cover for 2026 and onward. So to wrap up this video, this is the end of Hammer Horror and looking onward to the future. Thank you for watching.